Hello chess fans! Playing the right opening can be incredibly important, since it will decide how well you start into the game and defines your plans later on in the middle game. Here I will give you an introduction to 8 openings, and this video will be divided into 2 parts: aggressive openings and more positional, slower ones. For the aggressive openings, we will go over the King's Gambit and the Vienna Game for white, and the Sicilian and the Scandinavian Defense for black. In the positional section, we will talk about the Ruy Lopez and English opening for white, and the Caro-Kann and the Pirc Defense for black. I will also include rating recommendations, and here's a disclaimer. All the tips and rating recommendations come from my research and experience. If you have a different opinion on any of these openings, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. Now, let's get started. Part 1. Aggressive openings. We will start with the white openings. First is, number 1, the King's Gambit. The starting moves of the King's Gambit are e4, e5 and f4. The aim with the opening is to get sharp attacking positions. If black takes the pawn, the white rook gets the whole very strong semi-open file. And since the white bishop often gets placed on c4, there is a lot of pressure on f7. The opening is mainly about getting a lead in development to then attack the opponent's king. Some of the cons of the opening are that you expose your king and sometimes black can hold onto the f-pawn. But those positions are usually very dangerous for black. In the King's Gambit accepted, white gets a very strong center, but he can't play d4 immediately because of queen h4. So he first needs to play knight f3. Also, don't worry about black being a pawn up. Often white regains the pawn, resulting in a very good position. If black declines the gambit, with knight c6 for example, you don't immediately take on e5. You rather want black to take on f4 later on. Here's how a resulting position from the King's Gambit can look like. This is now a bit drastic, but as you can see, white gets a very strong center and good attacking prospects. His pieces are placed well, he regained the f-pawn, and can try to start an attack. Often, in the King's Gambit, you get very open and sharp positions, with possible attacks on both sides. If you are excelling at tactical, complicated and double-edged positions with chances for either color, this would be a pick for you. But if you like it a bit calmer, this opening isn't that fitting for you, since you will have to be very courageous and often you also need to defend your own king. My rating recommendation for this is around 800 plus. This is also, surprisingly, one of those openings that you can play early on and use until top level. History of the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit is one of the oldest documented openings in chess. It also appeared in the oldest surviving printed chess book to date, which is called, when translated, Repetition of Love and the Art of Playing Chess with 150 Games, and was written by Lucina. Published in 1497, of which still a few copies remain. It was very popular in the Romantic era of chess, so between the 18th and 19th century. After that, the gambit declined a bit in popularity, because new defensive resources were discovered. It isn't as common as other openings among the elite, but players like Alexander Alekhine, Boris Spassky, Hikaru Nakamura, and Judith Polgar have used it. It is more of a surprise weapon instead of a regular opening, but it's still a very cool way to begin the game. Number 2. The Vienna. The Vienna game starts after the move e4, e5, and instead of knight f3, which we will talk about later, white plays the more offbeat knight c3. Some of the good things about this opening are that there is not much theory and it has some clear strategical plans. Now, let's look at the first line, which is the Vienna Gambit. After e4, e5, knight c3, black plays knight f6, and now white pushes f4. You don't really lose a pawn, because if black takes, you can now play e5. The knight has no squares and needs to drop back to g8, which is pretty horrible. Like in the King's Gambit, you have to play knight f3 to block any queen h4 checks. Black's best move now is d6. Now white can strengthen the center with d4, and you have a great position. Essentially, f4 distracts the e5 pawn from the center to then take control. It is very similar to the King's Gambit, except that you already have a knight into the game, and it is more flexible than the King's Gambit. Now, what happens if black doesn't take on f4? If black plays something like knight c6 for example, you just take on e5. After knight takes e5, you can play d4, and when the knight moves, you can play e5 again. Like in the last line, the knight has no squares and needs to drop back to g8. This is already plus 1.2 for white, so as you can see, a very great position. However, here's a reminder to always be careful with this open diagonal. You should play knight f3 soon. If instead of knight c6, they play d6, which is better, you just play knight f3, with a normal position. Now in this position, what happens after knight c6? f4 is still playable, but black can play queen h4, forcing you to play g3, which in my opinion is a bit uncomfortable. But you can also fianchetto the bishop, and as said, it's playable. More common though is bishop c4, normal development. Knight f6, and you can play d3 and prepare f4, or just develop your pieces further. If you play f4 immediately, that runs into knight takes e4, and d5 with a fork, and black is already much better. You also, generally, don't have to play f4. You can also just develop normally. But keep in mind the pattern with knight takes e4, so d3 is a good move in a lot of positions where the bishop is already out on c4. The plans in the Vienna often collide with those in the King's Gambit. Use the f-file to attack, build a strong center, and try to get a lead in development. My rating recommendation for this opening is that it's playable for all rating categories. The Vienna follows basic opening principles like developing your pieces and controlling the center. And in my opinion, the king is a tad safer than in the King's Gambit. At the start, you don't have to learn a lot of theory. The moves come very natural. It has some similarities to the King's Gambit, but the Vienna, in my opinion, is a bit more flexible. The game can go both ways. Whereas in the King's Gambit, you will rarely get a positional game. However, at its core, the Vienna is an active opening, so more suited for the aggressive player. History of the Vienna game. It is a relatively new opening compared to some of the other ones, with Austrian players like Wilhelm Steinitz and Rudolf Spielmann who were based in Vienna using the opening. Even though it was already played around 1850, it only got more popular after the 1930s. Today, among the top, it lost some of its popularity, but top players still sometimes use it, among them were Yi, Hikaru Nakamura and Richard Rapport, and in the past it was also played by top players like Anand and Tartakova. Now we are getting into the black openings for this section, starting with number 3, the Sicilian. Chances are you know this opening already, because fun fact, this is the most played opening against e4. It has been played almost double the amount of e5. The Sicilian starts after e4, c5. This looks a bit weird because you attack the center from the side instead of directly with e5. The main ideas for black in the Sicilian are to get a very uneven game with aggressive attacking positions. However, the white side gets a lot of play too, leading to sharp, double-edged positions. Pretty common for white is knight f3, planning d4, which is also called the open Sicilian. White immediately fights in the center, trying to gain control. There are multiple setups you can play against this. One example is knight c6, g6, and bishop g7, which is also called the dragon setup. d6, e6 is also possible, and sidelines like b6 or knight f6 are also options. Then there is knight c3, which leads to a closed Sicilian, where white does not push d4. He will commonly plan moves like g3 and bishop g2. Another common response for white is knight c3, but instead of planning to fianchetto the bishop, he wants to play f4 on the next move, which is called the Grand Prix attack and looks familiar to the Vienna game. There are also gambits like d4 or even b4, other lines like c3, which is called the Alpine Sicilian, but I will not go into any of these lines, as this opening is very theory heavy and the video would get way too long. As said, the Sicilian is a very theory heavy opening, and the opinions on if you can also play this as a beginner are divided. If you watch one video, the person will tell you that of course beginners can play the Sicilian, and when you go to the next, this person tells you you should wait until you're at least 2000 plus. My recommendation is 1600-1700, but if you want to play the Sicilian, get good positions out of it, and the moves come naturally, of course go ahead and play it, even if you are lower rated. The history of the Sicilian. This opening is also one of the oldest openings documented, being first mentioned in Giulio Palerio's Italian chess book published in 1594, even though he did not call it the Sicilian. Where the name Sicilian Defense first appeared is a bit unclear, with some sources citing that the English chess master Jacob Henry Sarrat standardized the name, referring to an old Italian manuscript where it was called like that, and other sources saying the opening got the name from a few Sicilian chess players who analyzed the opening. Either way, it remains one of the most used chess openings in history, at both amateur and top level. A side note, the dragon setup, which is popular in the Sicilian, actually got its name after the star constellation the Dragon, because the pawn setup looks like the stars in the pattern. Number 4. The Scandinavian. The Scandinavian defense, often just shortened to Scandi, starts after the moves e4, d5. Black immediately seeks activity in the center, but also breaking one principle. After e takes d5, queen takes d5, bringing the queen out too early. It is an interesting alternative to the other response moves like c5 and e5. Black often loses time recapturing the d-pawn, but Black's bishop also gain more freedom, since they aren't stuck behind their own pawns like in the French defense, for example. Here, the most common move for White is knight c3, and now Black has 3 main options. He can place the queen on a5, back to d8, or on e6. Queen e6 keeps the queen closer to the center, but also more vulnerable to attacks, and makes the e-pawn a lot harder to move, which then makes it harder to develop the pieces. Queen a5 puts the queen on the long diagonal towards the king. Here, c6 is a common move to give the queen an escape route. Queen d8 just brings the queen back to safety, but it's also a bit slow in my opinion. Black wants to stop White from getting a strong center, otherwise the plans are normal development and center control. Often, he also castles queenside with pressure along the d-file. As a rating recommendation for the Scandi, I would say everybody can play it. It is pretty straightforward and easy to play, with not a lot of theory. I would say most important is the experience in the opening. The history of the Scandinavian. The opening was actually featured first in a recorded fictional game from the poem Schachs der Amor, or Chess of Love in English, which was probably written around 1475. Even though the original of the Valencian poem was apparently lost, a photograph still exists. The poem contains 64 stanzas, or strophes, as many as there are squares on the chessboard. This opening also appeared in Lucina's book we talked about earlier, so again, an incredibly old opening. The name most likely came from Scandinavian masters like Ludwig Collin, showing that it is playable. Although it never gained popularity among the elite, it has sometimes been seen on the top-level games, and the Scandinavian has been very trendy among amateurs, being a common weapon against e4. Now we will get into Part 2, Positional Openings. Starting again with White. First up we have number 5, the Ruy Lopez. This opening, which is also called the Spanish game, starts after the moves e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop b5. White is putting pressure on e5, because the c6 knight is defending Black's central pawn. Most often, he will play a6, immediately forcing the bishop to take action. Here, most often, the bishop drops back to a4. But if White decides to win the pawn back on e5, with bishop takes c6, d takes c6, knight takes e5, Black can easily get the pawn back via queen e7, with an already slightly better position, due to the active queen and White's a bit vulnerable king. Let's go back to the bishop a4 line. Now common for Black is b5, after which the bishop goes back to b3. White has a small lead in development, more center control, but Black has a space advantage on the queen side. Common plans for White include c3, preparing d4, intending to build a strong pawn center, whereas Black often tries to hit the e4 pawn via knight f6. The Ruy Lopez is very straightforward. White develops normally, prepares castling, and is trying to control the center. In my opinion, a very good opening for beginners. One thing to note though, there is a lot of theory for the more advanced players. On the beginner level, you will probably have to learn close to nothing. Just keep watch that the bishop doesn't get trapped. The history of the Ruy Lopez. The Ruy Lopez is named after the 16th century Spanish player, Ruy Lopez de Segura. He studied the opening with some others in his manuscript, which translated means Book of the Liberal Invention and Art of the Game of Chess, written in 1561. However, the opening was already mentioned earlier in the Göttingen manuscript. Number 6. The English. The English opening starts with the move c4 by white. Like in the Sicilian, controlling the center from the flank, which leads to white being more flexible. Often the English can also transpose into other openings, like the Queen's Gambit for example. There are two main responses for black, e5 and c5. After e5, white has multiple continuations. He can play knight f3, developing and controlling more of the center, g3, which is a popular setup and plans to fianchetto the bishop. Since one of white's main plans is to pressure the queen side, the bishop will be a helpful piece. Other continuations include b3, e3, preparing d4, or d4 immediately. In case of c5, most popular by far is knight c3, with general plans trying to get the pawn push d4 in, and again, the g3, bishop g2 setup. A few downsides of the opening are that white is slower in development and it has some theory, since it can transpose to a lot of other openings. The English isn't really an opening for beginners, since it requires understanding of positional concepts. As a more experienced player though, you can definitely get pleasant positions. The opening is flexible and sound. My recommendation is 14 to 1500 and plus, a nice choice for already more advanced players. The history of the English. The opening got its name from the English chess master Howard Staunton. He played the English in a match in 1843. He is also the player that standardized the now popular Staunton chess pieces. The opening got popular in the 20th century and is still popular to this day, with players like Mikhail Botvinnik, Tigran Petrosian, Garry Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov having used it. Now, for the black openings in this category. Number 7. The Pirc Defense. The Pirc Defense starts after e4, d6. This is a more passive approach than putting a pawn in the center immediately. d4 is a popular response, taking space in the center, after which black can play knight f6 or g6. g6 is a setup with bishop g7, which is common in the Pirc. In the long run, black wants to put pressure on the white center, which can sometimes get loose, especially if f4 or c4 get played. White can also play f4 immediately, which is called the rat defense. Very pretty name, I know. There might be f5 ideas for him in the future, especially if black plays g6. This can lead to a king's side attack for him. After f4, black can choose from numerous responses. g6 is playable, knight f6 is also playable, or even e5, transposing into a king's gambit type of position. The Pirc is easy in that matter that you have a few setups that are similar against multiple right responses. Like with the Sicilian, the opinions in terms of rating range for the Pirc differ. The problem is that black has less central space, therefore leading to a bit more passive positions, which a lot of players find hard to navigate and uncomfortable to play. For this opening, I will not give a recommendation, as I think that for the Pirc you just need to try it out. If you like it, you could totally play it as a beginner. The history of the Pirc. First, in case you have ever wondered how the opening is pronounced, there you go. It is named after the Slovenian GM Vizja Pirc, born in 1907, and is a relatively new opening. It isn't as popular as some of the other openings, but it is still played on elite level and also appeared in the World Championship match from 1972. Number 8 and last, the Caro-Kann. Also a very popular opening, which starts after e4 and then c6 by black. The most common positions you will face will look like this: white playing d4 and then black continues with d5. But there can sometimes be deviations from the second move. Now, why on earth c6? The idea behind c6 is to have a very solid pawn structure, and then later attack white's center with the thematic pawn break c5. Now white has a lot of options: the advanced variation with e5, the exchange variation with e takes d5, also knight d2 and knight c3 are playable, and even f3. The Caro-Kann has a good amount of theory. It is also not as straightforward as some of the other openings. The patterns and ideas are a bit more positional and require understanding. My rating recommendation for the Caro-Kann would be 13 to 1400 and plus. The history of the Caro-Kann. The defense got its name from the players Horatio Caro from England and Marcus Kann from Austria. They analyzed the opening together and later published the analysis in a German magazine. The Caro-Kann is very popular, being the fourth most common choice against e4 and is used by elite players and amateurs alike. Okay, this is it. I hope you found an opening that you like and plan to study further. If you enjoyed this video, I would be happy about the thumbs up and a comment. See you next time, and until then, GG's.